Sometimes the greatest love isn't found in grand gestures, but in the quiet strength of a father's hand on his child's shoulder. This is the story of one family, tested by loss, held together by love, and shaped by the simple courage to keep going. A story that proves home isn't just a place, it's the people who never let you fall. On the edge of a small coastal town in New South Wales, the Collins family lived in a weatherboard house with a wide veranda that creaked when you stepped on it. From the veranda, you could see the gum trees stretching tall, their leaves shimmering silver in the sunlight, and if the wind was right, you could smell the salt off the sea. Jack Collins, the father, wasn't a man of many words. He didn't need to be. His children, Mia, who was 10, and Sam, who was 7, understood his love not through what he said, but through what he did. He was the kind of bloke who'd wake before dawn, boil the kettle, and pack the kids' lunches before they even stumbled out of bed. Life hadn't been easy for the Collins family. Jack worked as a mechanic in town, his hands always marked with grease and scratches, but his smile, when it came, was soft, like the glow of a campfire. His wife, Emma, had passed away 2 years earlier, leaving Jack to raise Mia and Sam on his own. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done, but also the thing he was most determined to get right. Every evening after the long hours at the workshop, Jack would return home tired, but never too tired to sit with the kids. Sometimes they'd kick the footy around the backyard until the sun dipped behind the hills. Other nights, they'd gather on the veranda with mugs of Milo, watching the stars come out one by one. "Dad?" Sam asked one night, his small voice breaking the silence. "Do you reckon Mum can see us from up there?" Jack's throat tightened, but he nodded. "Yeah, mate. She can see every goal you kick, every joke you tell, every time you make your sister laugh. She'd be proud of you both." Mia leaned against his arm, quiet but comforted. She'd grown a little more serious since Emma's passing, often stepping into the role of helper around the house. Jack worried about that sometimes, about her childhood slipping away too fast, but he also knew that Mia's strength was what kept Sam steady. In the town, people admired Jack, not because he was extraordinary, but because he was steady, reliable, and good-hearted. He never asked for help, though he'd be the first to offer it. When the neighbor's ute broke down, Jack fixed it after hours without charging a cent. When old Mrs. Harris lost her dog, he spent the better part of a Saturday searching the bush until he found it. But at home, he was just Dad, and that was enough. One Saturday morning, Jack decided to take the kids to the beach. They piled into his old ute, the windows rolled down, the air filled with the smell of salt and sunscreen. Sam sang loudly from the back seat, making up silly words, while Mia pretended to roll her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. When they reached the shore, the three of them ran barefoot across the hot sand, laughing, the waves crashing ahead. Jack watched as his kids played, their laughter carried away on the sea breeze, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel: hope. That day ended with fish and chips wrapped in paper, eaten on the bonnet of the ute while the sun set in a blaze of pink and gold. Jack looked at his children, their faces sticky with tomato sauce, and he thought, this is what I'm fighting for. This is why I keep going. It wasn't a grand life, it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. And for Jack Collins, that was everything. Shadows and struggles. Life had a rhythm in the Collins household, but it was far from smooth. Jack did his best to keep things steady, yet the quiet weight of loss always lingered. Mia sometimes woke in the night from dreams she couldn't explain. Jack would find her sitting on the edge of her bed, her eyes wide, clutching the little stuffed kangaroo her mum had given her. He never asked her to talk if she didn't want to. Instead, he'd just sit beside her, rubbing her back gently until she leaned against him and drifted off again. Sam, on the other hand, carried his grief differently. He grew restless, often acting out at school. His teacher, Mrs. O'Connor, rang Jack one afternoon. "Jack, I don't mean to worry you," she said kindly, "but Sam's been struggling to focus. He's a bright boy, but I think he's finding it hard to cope." Jack sighed, running a hand over his face. "Thanks for letting me know. I'll have a yarn with him." That evening, after dinner, Jack took Sam outside. They sat on the old wooden steps, the crickets chirping around them. "Mate," Jack began softly, "your teacher reckons you've been a bit distracted lately. What's going on?" Sam shrugged, his little shoulders tight. The other kids? They say I don't have a mom. They laugh about it. Jack's chest ached. He pulled Sam close. Listen here, son. You've got a mom, and she loved you more than anything in this world. Just because she's not here doesn't mean she's gone from your life. You carry her with you, in your smile, in the way you look out for your sister. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Sam sniffed, nodding, his small hand gripping his dad's. Money was another worry. Jack's mechanic shop barely brought in enough to cover bills, food, and school fees. Some nights, after the kids had gone to bed, he'd sit at the kitchen table with the old calculator, trying to make the numbers stretch. The house needed repairs, the ute was on its last legs, and there never seemed to be enough left over. But Jack never let Mia or Sam see the worry in his eyes. For them, he kept his smile. One particularly tough week, the fridge broke down. Jack didn't have the cash to buy a new one, so he patched together a second-hand one from spare parts. It rattled like a tractor but kept the milk cold, and that was all that mattered. When neighbors offered help, Jack politely refused. Pride was stitched into him like the seams of his work shirt. We'll manage, he always said. And somehow they did. Despite everything, he made time for the kids. On Fridays, he'd pick up a block of chocolate, break it into pieces, and they'd share it while watching the footy on TV. Those little rituals, simple, ordinary, became their glue. But the hardest moment came one rainy afternoon. Mia had found an old photo album tucked away in the cupboard. She opened it and saw her mother smiling, arms wrapped around her as a baby. Tears rolled down her cheeks before she even realized. Jack walked in and froze. He sat down beside her, the photo album open between them. "Dad," Mia whispered, her voice trembling, "why did she have to go? Why her?" Jack's heart felt like it might split in two. He placed his hand gently on hers. "Love, I don't have the answers. Life, it doesn't always make sense. But what I do know is that your mom gave us her love. That's something we'll always have, no matter what." They sat there together, looking at the photos until the rain eased outside. From then on, Jack started telling more stories about Emma. Not in a heavy way, but in little moments. Like when Mia baked scones and he'd say, "Your mom made them just like that." Or when Sam laughed too loudly and he'd grin, "That laugh's your mom's, through and through." He realized that by keeping her memory alive, he wasn't keeping his children stuck in the past. He was giving them roots strong enough to face the future. Still, the strain took its toll. Jack often woke with aching muscles, his hands stiff from long hours at the workshop. Some nights, after tucking the kids in, he'd sit on the veranda with a cup of tea, staring at the stars. He'd wonder if he was enough, if he could really raise 2 kids on his own. But every time doubt crept in, he'd hear Sam's laughter through the window, or see Mia's drawings pinned proudly to the fridge, and he'd remind himself, they don't need perfect, they just need me. The town slowly became their extended family. Mrs. Harris would bring over lamingtons now and then. The neighbors often waved Jack down to share fresh veggies from their gardens. And though he rarely admitted it, those small acts of kindness lightened his load. Life wasn't easy for the Collins family. It was messy, painful, and uncertain, but it was also filled with moments of love so strong they could outshine the darkest nights. And Jack knew, deep down, that as long as he kept showing up, day after day, night after night, his children would grow, not broken, but strong. Because love, in its quiet, steady way, was enough. The weight of sacrifice. Winter rolled in across the coast, bringing with it gray skies and sharp winds that rattled the windows of the Collins weatherboard house. Jack rose earlier than ever, pulling on his old flannel jacket and heading to the shed before dawn. The workshop's business dipped during the cold months. People put off repairs when they could, but Jack still took whatever work came his way. It wasn't uncommon for him to spend 14 hours a day fixing engines just to scrape by. His hands were calloused, the skin around his nails cracked and stained. Yet he never once complained in front of Mia or Sam. Mia noticed, though. She always did. She began getting up earlier, too, making her own breakfast and packing Sam's lunch so Dad wouldn't have to. Jack tried to stop her once, but she looked at him with that determined little frown that reminded him so much of Emma. "Dad," she said, stubborn but gentle, "you work too hard already. Let me help." Jack swallowed the lump in his throat and let her. Sam, meanwhile, seemed to grow wilder with each passing week. He was full of energy, always running, climbing, tumbling into scrapes. Jack worried the boy was heading for trouble, but deep down he knew it was Sam's way of coping. When he fell and skinned his knees, Jack would patch him up and say, "You'll be right, mate. Just means you're learning." One evening, after a particularly long day, Jack returned home to find the kids had drawn a picture for him. It showed the three of them standing beneath a giant gum tree, holding hands, smiling. At the top, Mia had written, "Our family." Jack pinned it to the kitchen wall and stared at it long after the kids had gone to bed. That scrap of paper reminded him why he kept pushing forward, no matter how hard life felt. Community stepping in. The Collins weren't alone, even if Jack liked to pretend they were. The town had a way of looking after its own. One Saturday, Jack was fixing a neighbor's ute when old Mr. Jenkins, who owned the general store, wandered over. "Jack," he said, scratching his chin, "heard Mia's good with her books. She's top of her class, eh?" Jack nodded proudly. "She's a sharp one, that's for sure." "Well," Jenkins said, lowering his voice, "there's a scholarship program run by the Rotary Club. Pays for books, uniforms, even some excursions. No shame in letting her apply. Might give her a fair go." Jack's first instinct was to refuse. He didn't want charity, but then he thought of Mia's quiet determination, of her dreams. She never spoke too loudly for fear of burdening him. Maybe this wasn't charity. Maybe it was opportunity. So he let her apply. Weeks later, when the letter arrived saying she'd won, Mia had burst into tears of joy. Jack had lifted her high onto his shoulders, laughing until the sound filled the whole house. Sam had his own moment of light not long after. The local footy club held a junior match, and Jack encouraged him to join. Sam ran onto the field like a whirlwind, his small legs pumping, his laughter echoing across the oval. He wasn't the best player, but he played with heart. Jack stood on the sidelines, clapping and cheering louder than anyone. That night, Sam announced proudly, "Mom would have loved that game." Jack ruffled his hair. "Too right, mate. She'd have been your biggest fan." Jack's quiet choices. Behind all these little triumphs were Jack's sacrifices. He skipped meals sometimes so the kids wouldn't notice the pantry running low. He wore the same pair of boots until the soles nearly fell off, saving his money for the children's school shoes instead. There was one day Mia found him at the kitchen table, head bowed over a stack of bills. She stood quietly in the doorway, then walked over and slipped her small hand into his. "You don't have to do it all alone, Dad," she whispered. Jack squeezed her hand, his voice rough. "I know, love. But it's my job to look after you two. That's what fathers do." What he didn't say, but felt deep in his bones, was that they were looking after him too. Without Mia's quiet strength, without Sam's wild energy, he might have collapsed long ago. The simple joys. For all the hardship, life wasn't without joy. There were evenings when Jack came home with fish and chips, and they ate it straight from the paper while sitting on the lounge room floor. There were weekends when they hiked into the bush, the kids racing ahead, pointing out kookaburras and kangaroos. And there were nights when they sat on the veranda together, mugs of hot Milo warming their hands, and Mia would ask her father to tell stories about when he was young. Jack would smile, leaning back in his chair. "Well, when I was about your age, I once tried to surf on a bit of old plywood. Nearly drowned, but I reckon I looked like a champion for about 3 seconds." The kids would burst out laughing, and for that moment, the heaviness lifted. The turning of seasons. As spring came, things began to shift. Mia flourished at school, her teachers noting not just her intelligence but her kindness. Sam found friends through footy, his laughter louder than ever. And Jack, though still worn down by long days, began to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Pride, not just in his kids, but in himself. He was far from perfect, but he was doing it. He was raising 2 good, strong kids. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, painting the sky gold and crimson, Jack sat on the veranda with Mia and Sam. The kids leaned against him, and he wrapped his arms around them both. "You know," he said softly, "we're not just a family, we're a team, and no matter what happens, we stick together, always." Mia nodded, her eyes shining. Sam grinned and said, "Like the Collins crew." Jack chuckled, pressing a kiss to their heads. "Yeah, mate, the Collins crew." And in that moment, With the cool breeze on his face and his children safe in his arms, Jack believed it. Whatever storms lay ahead, they'd face them together. The turning point. The Collins' life rolled forward, steady and simple. Struggles still came. Money was always tight, and Jack's body felt older than his years. But something had shifted. The kids were growing, not just taller, but stronger in spirit. Mia especially was beginning to shine. She had always been sharp, but now, with the help of her scholarship, she had access to more books, excursions, and even a laptop donated by the local Rotary Club. She soaked up knowledge like the dry earth after rain. One Saturday morning, she sat at the kitchen table scribbling in a notebook while Jack patched a hole in the back fence. "What you working on, love?" he asked, wiping the sweat from his brow. "An essay for school," Mia replied without looking up. "It's about people who inspire us." Jack chuckled. "And who's your pick then? Some scientist? A famous writer?" Mia glanced up at him, her eyes soft. "You." The hammer slipped from Jack's hand. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. Finally, he swallowed hard and said, "You'd better not make me cry in front of your brother, all right?" Mia laughed, but her words stayed with him long after. He often wondered if he was enough for them, but to Mia, he was already her hero. Sam's moment. Sam was a different story altogether, wild, loud, and bursting with energy. But on the footy field, that energy found a home. By the time he was 9, his coach had noticed his speed. "That boy's got legs like lightning," the coach said one evening, clapping Jack on the shoulder. Sam trained hard, his grin never fading even when he was covered in mud from head to toe. At his first proper match, Jack stood on the sideline, boots caked in dirt, shouting until his voice was hoarse. When Sam broke through the defense and scored a goal, the crowd erupted. Jack felt something swell in his chest, a pride so fierce it almost hurt. After the game, Sam came running over, breathless, cheeks flushed. "Did you see, Dad? Did you see me?" Jack scooped him up in his arms despite the mud. "Too right I did, mate. Your mum would have been hollering from the rooftops." That night, Sam fell asleep on the couch, still clutching his footy. Jack carried him to bed, tucking him in gently. For once, he didn't worry about bills or the leaky roof. For once, he just felt proud. A father's legacy. The more the children grew, the more Jack realized that every sacrifice was shaping them. The meals he'd skipped, the hours he'd worked, the pride he'd swallowed, it was all building something stronger than he could have imagined. Mia had a quiet wisdom far beyond her years. She often helped neighbors with homework or read to the younger kids down the street. People started saying, "That Collins girl, she's going places." Sam, meanwhile, was becoming the heart of his team, his laughter infectious, his courage on the field admired by everyone. But what made Jack proudest wasn't their achievements, it was their kindness. Mia always made sure Sam had the bigger slice of cake. Sam always looked out for Mia if other kids teased her. They leaned on each other in the same way Jack leaned on them. One night, as they sat around the dinner table, Mia announced, "Dad, there's a competition at school for public speaking. I'm going to write about family." Jack smiled. "That'll be a good yarn." A week later, he sat in the school hall, his rough hands gripping the edge of his seat as Mia stood on stage. Her voice trembled at first, but soon grew steady. "My father," she said, "is the bravest person I know. He doesn't wear a uniform, he doesn't fight battles in faraway places, but every day he fights for us. He shows me that family is about love, sacrifice, and never giving up. And that makes him my hero." By the time she finished, Jack's eyes were stinging. He wasn't the only one. Half the hall was dabbing their eyes with tissues. Mia won first place that night, but for Jack, the real victory was hearing his daughter speak words he'd never dared believe, that he was enough. A day to remember. Months later, the Collins family had a rare free Sunday. Jack packed the ute with sandwiches, towels, and an old cricket bat. They drove out to the beach, the same one they had visited years before, when grief still felt raw. This time, the air felt different, lighter. They built sandcastles, chased waves, and played cricket until Sam accidentally smashed the ball into the surf and nearly dived in after it. Mia laughed so hard she doubled over. As the sun set, painting the ocean in gold, Jack sat with his kids on the bonnet of the ute, munching sandwiches. He looked at their sunburnt noses, their shining eyes, and felt a peace he hadn't known in years. "This," he said softly, almost to himself, "this is what life's about." The kids didn't answer. They didn't need to. They just leaned against him, watching the horizon where the sea met the sky. A whisper of the future. Back at home that night, Jack tucked Mia and Sam into bed. He paused at their doorway, listening to the soft rhythm of their breathing. He thought of Emma, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't just feel sadness, he felt gratitude. He whispered into the quiet room, "We're doing all right, love. The kids, they're gonna be just fine." And deep down, he knew it was true. The road ahead would still have struggles, but the turning point had come. His children were not only surviving, they were thriving, and that made every sacrifice worth it. The legacy of love. Years rolled by, as they always do. The Collins kids grew taller, their lives slowly branching beyond the weatherboard house on the edge of town. Mia, with her quiet determination, earned a place at university. She studied hard, chasing her dream of becoming a teacher. Sam, the wild spirit, chased his passion for footy, playing in junior leagues with the same grin that once lit up backyard games. Through it all, Jack remained their anchor. His hair grayed, his back grew stiff, but his heart stayed the same, steady, strong, and overflowing with love for his kids. Mia's milestone. On the day of Mia's graduation, Jack drove to the city in his battered ute. He wore his best shirt, still a bit worn at the cuffs, but he stood tall as he watched his daughter walk across the stage in her gown and cap. When her name was called, Mia spotted him in the crowd. She raised her chin a little higher, her eyes shining, and Jack clapped until his hands stung. Afterwards, when she found him outside, she wrapped her arms around him. "I couldn't have done this without you, Dad," she whispered. Jack shook his head. "Nah, love, you did this. All I did was pack your lunch and nag you to do your homework." Mia laughed, but she held him tighter. They both knew the truth. Every late night he'd worked, every sacrifice he'd made, had paved the way for this moment. Sam's dream. Sam's path was different, but no less bright. By his late teens, he'd become known around town as the kid with unstoppable energy. His footy coach once told Jack, "That boy's got grit. He'll go far." At his first regional game, Jack was there on the sidelines, just as he had been for every game since Sam was 7. When Sam scored the winning goal, the crowd erupted. Jack's cheer rose above them all, his pride louder than any stadium could hold. After the match, Sam ran up, breathless. "Did you see, Dad? Did you see me?" Jack laughed, clapping his son's shoulder. "Mate, I'll never forget it. You're your mom's spirit out there, fearless." Sam grinned, but his eyes softened. He knew what those words meant. He knew the love behind them. The quiet years. When the kids began to build their own lives, Jack found himself alone in the weatherboard house more often. The silence was strange at first. He missed the sound of Mia's pencil scratching late at night, the thud of Sam's boots on the veranda. But he wasn't lonely. His children visited often, and when they did, the house filled once again with laughter, Milo mugs, and stories that stretched late into the night. Neighbors still stopped by, sometimes bringing scones or homegrown tomatoes. Jack still lent a hand when someone's ute broke down, though his knees weren't what they used to be. He never boasted about his kids, but the pride was plain in his eyes whenever anyone asked. "They're good people," he'd say simply. "That's all that matters." Full circle. One summer evening, years after the hardest days had passed, Mia and Sam returned home together. They sat on the veranda with Jack, watching the sun dip behind the gum trees. Mia held his hand, the same way she had when she was a child. "Dad," she said softly, "do you ever wonder if Mom would be proud of us?" Jack's throat tightened. He looked at his grown children, the teacher who guided young minds, the athlete who carried joy wherever he went. He thought of Emma, her smile, her laughter, the love she had poured into their little family. "She'd be proud," he said, his voice rough but certain, "of you both, and she'd be proud of us, how we kept going, how we stuck together." Sam leaned forward, his grin softer now. "The Collins crew, Dad. We never gave up." Jack laughed, the sound breaking into a cough, but his eyes shone with tears he didn't bother to hide. "That's right, mate. The Collins crew." The legacy years later, when Mia had children of her own and Sam had built his career, they often found themselves telling stories of their father. Mia would tell her students about resilience, about love that doesn't need grand words to prove itself. She'd smile and say, "My father taught me that the greatest heroes are often the quietest ones." Sam, whether on the field or with friends at the pub, often spoke of his dad's cheers, his steady presence on the sidelines. He was always there, he'd say simply. Always. And in their hearts, both knew that Jack's greatest gift wasn't the roof over their heads or the meals on the table. It was the unshakable belief that love, steady and strong, was enough to hold a family together. Closing, one evening, long after Jack had passed, Mia and Sam stood together at the old house. The gum trees still whispered in the wind, the veranda still creaked underfoot. They sat side by side, just as they had with their father, mugs of Milo warming their hands. Mia looked out at the stars and said softly, "Home isn't just a place, it's the people who never let you fall." Sam nodded, his voice quiet but sure, and Dad never let us fall. The night was still, the sky endless above them, and though Jack was gone, his love remained, in their hearts, in their lives, and in the family they had built from his strength. Because some legacies aren't written in history books. They're written in love, in sacrifice, and in the simple, unshakable bond of a father and his children. And that, the Collins children knew, would never fade.